The sound of the slap echoed like a gunshot. Crystal glasses rattling, conversations silenced, and every eye frozen on the scene. There she was, Amara Lewis, lying on the cold marble floor of an upscale Manhattan restaurant, her cheek burning from the blow of a billionaire's hand. He had struck her not just with his palm, but with every ounce of power, arrogance, and racism that money can buy. But what happened next? Amara stood back up, blood on her lip, dignity unbroken. She stood. And what followed wasn't just a personal fight for justice. It was a battle that would expose corruption, inspire a movement, and remind us all that no amount of wealth can buy dignity. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is a story of resilience, power, and the quiet strength that lives in all of us, no matter how small we're made to feel. If this story stirs something in you, a memory, a lesson, a reminder, please like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss another story that speaks to the heart of justice. Now let's sit back and listen to the story together. In the heart of Manhattan, where glittering lights kiss the skyline and fortunes are made overnight, there's a kitchen that never sleeps. The Orpheus. It's not just any restaurant, but a temple of French cuisine where billionaires, celebrities, and politicians dine under crystal chandeliers, expecting perfection on every plate. And deep within its polished walls works Amara Lewis, a 28-year-old sous chef whose presence in that kitchen is nothing short of extraordinary. Amara isn't just skilled, she's gifted. Her hands know the language of flavors the way a composer hears music in his mind. She was once the pride of her culinary school, a rising star destined for Michelin acclaim. But life, as it often does, had other plans. At just 19, a single mistake, trusting the wrong man, changed her path forever. She discovered she was pregnant. Her dreams of culinary greatness dimmed overnight when the father disappeared, leaving her to face the world alone. Now a single mother, Amara juggles the razor-sharp demands of the Orpheus and the fragile health of her son, Jayden, a bright 9-year-old boy with a heart full of wonder and lungs weakened by severe asthma. Every breath he takes is a battle, and every medical bill a mountain she must climb. She rises before dawn, walking nearly a mile to catch the early subway, knowing that every dollar she earns puts another inhaler within Jayden's reach. And yet, despite the exhaustion, the long shifts, and the cold stares she sometimes gets in a world that rarely makes room for black women, Amara never lets herself falter. Because for her, every dish she perfects, every sauce she masters, it's not just food. It's hope. It's survival. It's a promise to her son that someday life will taste sweeter. But fate, with all its indifference to human plans, has a way of testing the very people who've already borne too much. That test came for Amara on a Saturday evening when the buzz inside the Orpheus was sharper than usual. The reservation book was marked with a name that carried weight. Lord William Beckford, a British billionaire whose reputation was as infamous as it was opulent. He was known in elite circles not just for his wealth, but for his venomous disdain for anyone who didn't fit his narrow, pale definition of worth. His opinions on race weren't whispered. They were published, printed, and proudly paraded under the guise of heritage. Lord Beckford had requested through his assistant that his private dinner be prepared and served exclusively by European professionals. That was the phrasing, a sterile mask for a demand drenched in prejudice. And yet the Orpheus, eager to preserve its standing among the powerful, agreed, not publicly but quietly, obliging him with an all-white staff assignment for the evening. It was a disgrace, unspoken but understood by those who worked behind the kitchen doors. Amara knew the arrangement. She knew her place wasn't meant to intersect with the likes of Lord Beckford. She'd been scheduled to work the back prep stations, away from the candlelit glow and velvet whispers of the private dining room. That was the plan until chaos struck. Just an hour before the dinner was to begin, Chef Roland, the esteemed French patron of the Orpheus, collapsed on the kitchen floor, his face pale as ash. A stroke, they said, swift and brutal. He was rushed out on a stretcher, his fate uncertain, leaving the kitchen in a storm of panic. Orders flew, voices rose, but one truth hung in the air heavier than the scent of rosemary and wine reductions. The head of the kitchen was gone, and the biggest VIP of the month was about to arrive. The sous chefs looked at one another, hesitant, unprepared. The truth was, none of them had Roland's mastery, except one, Amara. She'd quietly learned every nuance of his recipes, every secret of his plating, every delicate sauce he prized. She had been his shadow, absorbing without recognition, perfecting without praise. Now all eyes turned to her. "Amara," the restaurant manager said, his voice tight with anxiety. "You're the only one who can pull this off." She froze. She knew what was at stake. She knew Lord Beckford's disdain, the color of her skin a target, before she'd even presented a dish. But she also thought of Jayden, the mounting hospital bills, the inhalers that were running low. She straightened her shoulders, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. "I'll do it," she said softly, steadying her breath. "I'll finish the menu." With that, Amara tied on her apron, hands trembling but eyes burning with resolve. She didn't have the luxury of fear. Not tonight. As the clock ticked down to the billionaire's arrival, she stepped into the role she was born for, even if the world was hell-bent on reminding her she didn't belong. The private dining room of the Orpheus glowed with soft amber light. Velvet drapes framed the tall windows, and the polished mahogany table shimmered under crystal chandeliers. When Lord William Beckford entered, the air itself seemed to shift. His presence carried the kind of oppressive gravity that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. He wore his wealth like armor, a tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks glinting like declarations of dominion, and a sneer that seemed permanently etched into his patrician face. Amara stood by the kitchen door for a moment, breathing deeply. She'd plated each course with precision, balancing flavors as if her own life depended on it, because in some ways it did. Now came the final act, presenting the entree to Lord Beckford himself. She gathered her courage, smoothed her apron, and stepped into the room, her footsteps soft against the marbled floor. The moment she approached, the conversation at the table dwindled to a hush. The guests, all clad in silks, satins, and the kind of arrogance that money buys, turned to see who dared bring their meal. And then came the stare. Lord Beckford's eyes locked onto her, his expression shifting from idle amusement to visible disgust. He chuckled dryly, a sound void of any warmth. "Tell me I'm dreaming," he muttered to his companions, loud enough for all to hear. "A Negro woman bringing my dinner in a place like this? What is this, a plantation reenactment?" Laughter rippled down the table, shallow and complicit. Amara felt the words strike her skin like sharp pebbles, but she kept her head high, her hands steady as she gently placed the plate before him. She could feel the weight of their gazes, their judgment, but she said nothing. Her professionalism was her shield, at least she hoped it was. But Beckford wasn't finished. "Look at this," he spat, leaning back in his chair with theatrical disappointment. "I travel 3,000 miles expecting European standards, and I get this?" He waved his hand dismissively, eyes raking over her as if she were filth dragged in from the street. "What is it they say? If you want something done right, send in the white man." The room tensed, but no one moved. No one ever did. Power, real, unchecked power, had a way of freezing the righteous in place. Then, as if to punctuate his disdain, Lord Beckford picked up his crystal wine glass, filled with an aged Bordeaux worth more than Amara's monthly rent, and hurled it to the floor. The glass shattered, dark red wine bleeding into the white carpet like a crime scene. "Pick that up," he commanded coldly. "On your knees." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Amara stood frozen, the fragments of glass scattered at her feet, the air thick with the scent of wine and humiliation. Her heart hammered, her face burned, but her spine stayed straight. Slowly she raised her eyes to meet his, that sneering, expectant face waiting for her to kneel like she was nothing. Instead, her voice cut through the silence, steady and low, but vibrating with every ounce of dignity she possessed. "You might have enough money to buy this city, Lord Beckford, but not enough to buy my dignity." A gasp fluttered through the room. The other diners stared, wide-eyed, not just at her defiance, but at the quiet strength in her stance. Her shoulders squared, her eyes unwavering. Amara stood like an oak, rooted deep in centuries of survival, of every ancestor who'd ever been told to kneel and refused. Beckford's smile twisted into a snarl, his cheeks flushed, his pride visibly wounded. For a man accustomed to absolute obedience, Amara's defiance was a public lashing. But she didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply stood there, tall and unbroken, as if every shattered shard of glass on the floor was a piece of his crumbling authority. In that room, under the weight of wealth, power, and prejudice, Amara Lewis did not kneel. The sting of her words hadn't even settled before Lord William Beckford lurched to his feet, the heavy legs of his chair scraping the marble floor with a sound as sharp as a knife against bone. The entire room stood still. Forks hovered mid-air, crystal glasses frozen halfway to lips, conversations extinguished as if oxygen had been sucked from the room. Beckford's face, usually an impassive mask of aristocratic disdain, now burned crimson with rage. His eyes, pale and piercing, locked onto Amara with a venom that felt centuries old, a gaze steeped in the entitlement of men who had never been told no. His hand trembled not from age, but from fury barely contained. "You filthy, insolent girl," he spat, his voice low and guttural, the civility stripped away. And before anyone could intervene, before any voice of reason could rise, his hand shot forward, the gold of his cufflink flashing beneath the chandelier light. The sound of his palm cracking against Amara's cheek echoed through the room like the sharp report of a gunshot. The impact sent her reeling backward, her body crumpling to the floor in an ungraceful, vulnerable heap. A collective gasp rippled through the guests, some rising halfway from their seats, others frozen, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the act. Amara tasted blood in her mouth. The sting bloomed across her face, her vision momentarily blurred from the force. But what burned more than the pain was the shame, not of herself, but for the world that allowed this. She had stood tall, spoken truth, and in return she was struck down like a servant in some ancient empire. But she did not cry. She did not plead. Slowly she pushed herself off the floor, one palm flat against the cold marble, the other bracing her knee. Her breath was shaky but controlled. As she stood, she wiped her mouth delicately, her fingers stained with a smear of blood. She refused to let the tremor in her limbs betray her resolve. William sneered, straightening his jacket as if slapping a woman half his size was merely a necessary adjustment. "Let that remind you of your place," he muttered, with a twisted satisfaction. What neither he nor most of the room noticed was the figure seated at the far end of the private chamber. A middle-aged woman in a tailored navy dress, dining alone. She hadn't touched her foie gras. Instead, her hand had slowly drifted beneath the table the moment Beckford rose, her phone camera discreetly trained on the unfolding scene. Her name was Evelyn Hart, a retired journalist once known for exposing Wall Street corruption. She'd seen injustice before, masked in boardrooms, whispered in private jets. But this was naked, violent, and unrepentant. She kept the camera steady, the red record icon blinking silently as Amara stood back up, cheeks flushed but eyes still sharp with defiance. The tension in the room was suffocating. The restaurant's manager, Richard, stood frozen near the doorway, his face pale as bone, sweat pooling at his temple. He knew the consequences of stepping forward, losing the restaurant's reputation, his job, his livelihood. Yet his gut twisted with the knowledge that doing nothing was just as damning. Amara stood silent. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at William. She stared at the floor for a moment, willing herself to keep her balance, to maintain her composure, to swallow the storm raging inside her chest. Then, just as quietly as she'd entered, she turned and walked back toward the kitchen, her spine straight as an iron rod, though every step felt like shards of glass beneath her feet. Evelyn Hart stopped recording only when the door swung closed behind Amara. She glanced down at her phone, heart pounding not just with outrage, but with the weight of the truth captured in those few brutal minutes. That night, the kitchen of the Orpheus was a tomb of silence. No one dared mention what had occurred. Amara scrubbed her hands over the sink until her knuckles burned raw. The blood washed away, but the shame clung to her like an unwanted perfume. But while the restaurant sought to bury the memory, Evelyn was already uploading the footage to a private cloud, attaching only a brief caption. "When money believes it can own people." She sent it to a trusted former colleague, a journalist who now ran an independent media outlet, unafraid of corporate giants. Within hours, the video leaked onto the internet, first quietly on niche platforms, then suddenly violently viral. By dawn, the footage had spread like wildfire, the image of a black woman slapped to the floor by a white billionaire for daring to assert her dignity. Hashtags exploded across Twitter, Reddit threads buzzed, and morning shows scrambled for angles. The outrage was instant, searing, and for a brief moment the world seemed to hold its breath. But William Beckford was not a man unprepared for public exposure. His empire wasn't just built on wealth, but on control. And he controlled a small army of tech consultants, PR fixers, and hackers for just such an occasion. Before the sun even rose over the Hudson, his team went to work. Videos vanished overnight, links broken, entire social media accounts that shared the clip were suspended or deleted outright, citing violations of community guidelines. News outlets that ran the footage woke up to legal threats and, in some cases, generous partnership offers that coincidentally arrived with non-disclosure agreements attached. By mid-morning, it was as if the video never existed, scrubbed, erased, drowned beneath the weight of Beckford's billions. On the surface, at least. But rumors don't die so easily. The internet remembers even when the pixels are wiped clean. Whispers spread on encrypted forums. Screenshots of the video before it disappeared became symbols of something larger, the eternal war between power and truth. And in a cramped, dimly lit apartment in Queens, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, watching the headlines flicker in and out on her phone screen, her swollen cheek a throbbing reminder of the night before. She'd seen the video posted, and then seen it vanish. But her anger didn't vanish. Neither did her resolve. She touched her cheek gently, then glanced across the room to where Jayden slept, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She thought of his future, of the world he'd inherit if people like Beckford continued to buy silence. Amara knew then this wasn't just a personal wound. It was a spark. And somewhere out there, she hoped, someone still held the match. By the following morning, the walls of Amara's world were already closing in. The first blow came in the form of an email, cold, formal, and devastating. The subject line read, "Immediate suspension pending review, the Orpheus management." No apology, no inquiry. Just a brief message citing the need to evaluate recent events and their impact on the restaurant's reputation. Amara stared at the words on her cracked phone screen, reading them over and over as if the meaning might somehow change. But it didn't. She was being pushed out, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she refused to kneel. And as the hours passed, the punishment grew heavier. Her phone became a portal of cruelty. The number she'd given to the restaurant for emergencies had somehow leaked. Calls, messages, voicemails, each one a jab, a sneer, or a threat. You should have stayed in the kitchen, girl. Next time, know your place, if there is a next time. People like you don't belong in places like the Orpheus. The texts came at all hours, sometimes disguised as delivery confirmations or appointment reminders. Amara deleted them, blocked numbers, but for every one she erased, 2 more appeared. The weight of unseen hatred pressed against her, a constant, invisible chokehold. But the worst part wasn't the messages. It was the silence that followed, from people she'd once worked beside, shoulder to shoulder in the heat of the kitchen. No one called to check on her. No one texted to ask if she was okay. At the Orpheus, it was as if she'd been erased, an inconvenient story management wanted to forget. The next day, when she walked Jayden to school, the air felt colder, the stares sharper. Parents she used to exchange polite nods with now looked away, pulling their children closer. At first, she thought she imagined it, until the whispers followed. She caught fragments as they passed. That's her, the troublemaker. Flaunting herself like that, of course she got in trouble. She's just looking for attention. She gripped Jayden's hand tighter, swallowing the sting behind her eyes. She couldn't afford to cry, not in front of him. But the cruelty didn't stop with her. That afternoon, a call from the school nurse shattered the thin piece she was clinging to. Jayden had suffered a severe asthma attack on the playground. When Amara rushed to the school, she found him in the nurse's office, his tiny body trembling, a nebulizer mask strapped to his face. His eyes were wide and wet with tears. "They called me a thug's kid, Mama," he wheezed between breaths. "They said you hit rich people for money. They wouldn't let me play." Her heart broke in ways no blow from Beckford ever could. She knelt beside him, brushing damp curls from his forehead, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. You're safe." But the truth was, she didn't feel safe anywhere. Not in the streets, not at home, not in the city she'd tried so hard to survive in. Every corner held eyes that judged, voices that mocked, and shadows that followed. By nightfall, Amara sat in the dark of her living room, Jayden finally asleep after another breathing treatment. She stared at her phone, screen black, as if the whole world had turned its face from her. In the quiet, a truth settled heavy on her chest. She wasn't just suspended, she was being erased. And yet, deep in that silence, something else stirred. Something older than her. Older than the city, older than every empire that ever tried to crush a woman who dared to stand. It was rage. It was resolve. She would not vanish, not like this. 2 days later, just as the gloom seemed unshakable, a knock sounded at Amara's door. Firm, deliberate, and entirely unexpected. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a split second, fear gripped her. Another reporter? Another threat? She peered through the peephole, heart pounding. Standing there, sharply dressed in a charcoal coat with a familiar but unexpected face, was Lucien Marchand, the famed French chef whose culinary empire glittered with Michelin stars. Amara had seen his picture 100 times in glossy food magazines, but never up close, and certainly never on her doorstep in Queens. She hesitated, then opened the door a crack. "Ms. Lewis," Lucien said, his accent refined but his tone warm. "Please forgive the intrusion. I believe we have a common enemy." Confused and cautious, Amara opened the door wider. Lucien offered a small, respectful nod. I was there that night, he continued, at the Orpheus. I saw everything that man did to you. Amara's throat tightened, and Lucien's lips curved into a thin, serious smile. And I caught it all, not just in memory. I recorded the entire assault on my phone. For a moment, she stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. The video, the one that had vanished from the internet, scrubbed clean by Beckford's influence, was not gone. It lived safe and intact in the hands of a man whose reputation was untouchable. Lucienne stepped into her modest apartment at her hesitant invitation. The space was dim, quiet, except for the soft hiss of Jayden's breathing machine from the back room. As Lucien sat, he pulled his phone from his coat and, with a few taps, the screen lit up. There, in vivid, undeniable clarity, was Beckford's slap, the sound of his palm colliding with Amara's face, the stunned silence of the room, and Amara's quiet, battered rise. Amara covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. Why? Why did you keep this? Lucien's eyes softened. Because I've seen men like him before. Men who believe their money cleans their sins. But I've also seen too many people like you erased by that same power. I couldn't stand by. He paused, then added with conviction, But I'm no lawyer, which is why I'm not alone. He reached into his coat again, retrieving a business card. Ivory, embossed, elegant. Valerie Cross, civil rights attorney. Valerie's the best, Lucien said. She's taken on politicians, CEOs, won battles nobody thought winnable. She agreed to meet you as soon as you're ready. Amara stared at the card, the weight of it heavier than gold. For the first time since the slap, since the suspension, since the threats, she saw a path forward. You're not alone in this, Amara, Lucien assured her gently. You've stood up for yourself. Now let us help you stand taller. Something inside her stirred, that same spark that had kept her on her feet that night, the one Beckford's hand couldn't extinguish. She looked up. Meeting Lucien's gaze, her voice quiet but clear. Let's make sure the world sees the truth. And with that, the first stone was cast. The decision to fight back wasn't just a choice, it was a declaration. And in a city like New York, declarations don't stay quiet for long. Within 48 hours of Valerie Cross officially filing a civil suit against Lord William Beckford, the whispers turned to roars. News outlets caught wind of the impending legal battle, commentators debated on prime time, and Beckford's team, accustomed to brushing scandal under the rug, realized that this was a storm they couldn't easily contain. But Beckford wasn't a man who played fair. For men like him, when money couldn't silence someone, intimidation would. It started subtly. A black SUV parked across from Amara's apartment for hours at a time, engine idling but no one emerging. The same vehicle appeared outside Jayden's school 3 days in a row. Amara noticed it, her stomach twisting with dread, but told herself it was just coincidence, a lie she clung to for Jayden's sake. But then came the phone calls. Not anonymous this time, real voices, low and direct, never shouting, never swearing. That made them more chilling. You think a lawyer can protect you? Drop the suit, or things get messy. We know your son, cute kid. Amara reported them to Valerie, but both women knew there was little the police could, or would, do, not when the threats were veiled just enough to be deniable. Lucien, when he heard, went pale with anger. You're not going anywhere alone, he insisted. I'll arrange for security, day and night. But Amara, stubborn and proud, resisted at first. She didn't want Jayden to see armed men shadowing their every step. She didn't want their tiny life, already fragile, turned into a fortress. It was pride, and it nearly cost her everything. One overcast afternoon, Amara picked Jayden up from school herself, his tiny hand gripping hers as they walked the few blocks home. The sky hung heavy, gray and low, like a lid pressing on the city. The sidewalks were busy but indifferent, just another day in New York. They were halfway down Sterling Avenue, a quieter stretch with fewer pedestrians, when Amara noticed the same black SUV trailing them, slow and deliberate. Her heart stuttered. She quickened her pace, clutching Jayden's hand tighter, but the SUV matched their speed. Then it accelerated, just slightly, until it suddenly cut sharply in front of them, tires screeching as it blocked their path. Two men jumped out, faces obscured by black caps and dark sunglasses. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. The menace in their stride was loud enough. Amara froze, instinctively pushing Jayden behind her. "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. One man smiled out, the kind of smile that held no joy, only threat. "Message from Lord Beckford. Drop the lawsuit." Amara's eyes darted around. No help, no witnesses close enough to intervene. The second man stepped forward, brandishing a switchblade, its steel flashing under the cloudy sky. "We don't want the kid to see anything nasty," he said flatly. "So do the smart thing." Jayden whimpered behind her, his breathing already quickening, the familiar, terrifying rasp of his asthma taking hold. Amara's mind raced. She couldn't fight. She couldn't outrun them, but she could stall. "We'll go," she said, voice trembling but steady. "I'll make the call right now. Just let me get my phone." She reached into her bag, fingers brushing past the pepper spray she carried. But she knew better than to gamble with Jayden so close. Instead, she grabbed her phone and pretended to fumble with it, dialing not Valerie, not the police, but Lucian. She pressed call, praying he'd pick up. The line rang. Once, twice. Then his voice. "Amara?" She didn't answer, just let the open line capture everything. But the men grew impatient. The one with the blade stepped closer, the blade's point inches from her side. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the air was pierced by the sharp, commanding bark of an engine, a second SUV barreling down the avenue, horn blaring. The black SUV's men turned, startled, just as the second vehicle skidded to a halt. Out spilled two men. Bodyguards Lucien had hired, monitoring her phone's emergency contact just as he'd instructed them to do. Guns weren't drawn, not yet, but the sheer presence, the size and certainty of those men was enough. The attackers cursed, exchanged a glance, and then bolted for their vehicle. The black SUV roared to life, peeling away down the street, vanishing into city traffic. Amara collapsed to her knees, pulling Jayden close, his breathing shallow and ragged. She dug into her bag, pulling out his inhaler, pressing it to his lips with shaking hands. "Breathe, baby. I'm here. Breathe." Jayden's small chest rose and fell, the medicine doing its work slowly, too slowly for a mother's patience. The bodyguards stood close, forming a protective barrier as Lucien's voice still echoed on the phone, frantic. "Amara, are you okay? I'm on my way." She couldn't speak, could barely breathe herself, but in her mind something snapped, not fear, not panic, but a furnace of rage. They had come for her son. They crossed a line she could never forgive. By the time Lucien arrived, his car skidding to a halt, his face pale with fury and guilt, Amara was already on her feet, Jayden's small frame cradled against her side. "We're done playing nice," she said, voice raw but unshaken. "I want security. I want eyes on us day and night." Lucien nodded, swallowing his shame for not acting sooner. "You'll have it," he promised, "starting tonight." And that night, under the hum of Queen's flickering streetlights, Amara stood by her window, watching the shadows outside. She was no longer just a woman filing a lawsuit. She was a mother defending her child, a fighter with nothing left to lose. Beckford wanted her afraid. He'd made her furious instead. By the next morning, Amara's life was no longer her own. What had begun as whispered threats and shadowy intimidation had now exploded into a national reckoning. True to her word, Valerie Cross made the first strike. With Lucian's consent, she released the uncut, high-definition video of that night at the Orpheus to the press. A clip that left no room for interpretation, no space for denial. The slap, the sneer, the command to kneel. It was all there, unflinching and undeniable. Valerie didn't just send it to news stations. She made sure it dropped everywhere. Social media platforms, independent news outlets, legal blogs. She held a press conference on the courthouse steps, standing beside Amara, her presence calm but unyielding. "This isn't just about a slap," Valerie declared, her voice crisp against the thrum of flashing cameras. "This is about power, the power of wealth, of race, of intimidation. Lord William Beckford tried to erase a woman's dignity with his hand, and then erase the evidence with his money. Today we're saying, not this time." The video swept across the country in a matter of hours. On Twitter, the hashtag #AmaraStand began trending as millions watched the footage and weighed in. The image of Amara, standing, blood at the corner of her lip but spine unbroken, became a symbol, a rallying point for those long silenced by power's heavy hand. But not everyone cheered. Within 24 hours, Beckford's response arrived, as sharp, cold, and calculated as the man himself. His legal team held their own press conference, a polished spectacle in front of a marble-columned law office in Midtown. Beckford, flanked by his attorneys, stepped to the podium, expression smug and unapologetic. "What we are witnessing," he announced, "is a coordinated character assassination. This so-called evidence is nothing more than a doctored video designed to defame my name and reputation. I will not be extorted." He then dropped his own bombshell. Beckford's team was filing a countersuit against Amara for defamation, slander, and reputational damage, a legal war that could cost millions. His attorneys cited newly discovered evidence, grainy, unverified clips suggesting Amara had a history of provoking authority, and whispered accusations that she had staged the incident for financial gain. The strategy was clear: muddy the waters, paint Amara as an opportunist, and divide public opinion. And for a while it worked. Cable news lit up with talking heads, debating the morality, the optics, the what-ifs. Conservative commentators sneered that Amara was playing the victim card, while activists and civil rights leaders took to the streets, demanding justice. Not just for her, but for every black woman ever silenced by power and wealth. Online, the battleground was brutal. Amara's social media filled with death threats, racial slurs, and photoshopped images meant to humiliate her. Trolls accused her of being a gold digger, a liar, a disgrace. Her phone never stopped buzzing, some messages of support, others venomous and cruel. Jayden wasn't spared either. Online bullies mocked his asthma, his small frame, calling him the weak kid of a weak mother. Amara bore it all with a grit she didn't know she possessed. But in the quiet moments when the cameras left and Jayden was asleep, the weight of it nearly crushed her. Valerie stayed close, as did Lucien. Their resolve never wavered. "He's trying to drown us in noise," Valerie told her late one night over a table cluttered with case files. "But noise isn't truth. The truth is on that video, and I'm not backing down. Neither was Amara." "Neither am I," she whispered. "He wants me broken, but I've been broken before. I survived it then. I'll survive it now." The battle lines were drawn. Beckford's power surged through airwaves and courtrooms, but for every lie he spread, there were still people, strangers, activists, mothers, fathers, who stood up, who shared Amara's image with the caption, "We see you, we believe you." And in a city that rarely remembers the faces of the fallen, Amara Lewis had become unforgettable. The day of the public trial arrived like a storm front. heavy, gray, and charged with the kind of electric tension that even the most hardened of reporters could feel in their bones. Outside the Manhattan courthouse, a throng of protesters gathered, their signs held high, their chants echoing between skyscrapers. Cameras from every major network lined the marble steps, their lenses trained on the entrance, where Amara Lewis would soon face the man who had tried to bury her dignity under billions of dollars. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Journalists, legal analysts, and social activists packed every bench. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the walls themselves knew a verdict here would ripple far beyond these four corners. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Valerie Cross, calm and razor-sharp as ever, sat beside her, a folder of notes meticulously organized. Across the room, Lord William Beckford lounged with the air of a man who already believed he'd won, his top-tier legal team arranged around him like an impenetrable shield. His smirk was barely concealed. The trial began with testimonies, cross-examinations, and legal posturing. Valerie presented the original video, uncut, authenticated, the violent slap immortalized for the world to see. Yet Beckford's attorneys were prepared. They attacked its legitimacy, introducing expert witnesses who suggested the footage had been tampered with, that the angle obscured provocation from Amara. Then came the real blow. Beckford's lead attorney stood and, with theatrical precision, held up a manila folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, pacing slowly before the jury, "we present court-sealed documents that establish Ms. Lewis has a prior criminal record, a theft conviction from her early 20s, which she failed to disclose, a woman with a history of dishonesty." He slid the papers onto the evidence table with a smirk. The courtroom stirred. Even the judge raised a brow. Amara's stomach turned cold. She shook her head slowly, whispering, "I've never been arrested in my life." But Valerie's expression darkened, not with doubt, but with calculation. She stood, objecting immediately. "We've seen no evidence supporting this, Your Honor, and we request immediate verification of these claims." The judge, a stern and seasoned woman, ordered a brief recess to authenticate the documents. Amara sank back in her seat, her heart pounding like a war drum. The gallery murmured, the buzz of doubt creeping like a shadow. Social media outside the walls was already alive with speculation. Did Amara lie? Criminal record? That changes everything. If it's true, maybe she isn't the victim we thought she was. Amara sat frozen, suffocated by a weight that felt heavier than the slap itself. She wasn't just losing a case. She was losing her name, her son's future, her truth. Then, just as the judge prepared to re-enter and resume, a commotion stirred near the back of the courtroom. A woman, short and composed but visibly tense, approached the bailiff. After a whispered exchange, the bailiff crossed the room swiftly, handing a note to Valerie. Valerie read it, eyes widening. She stood immediately. "Your Honor, before proceedings continue, the plaintiff requests to call a surprise witness. This individual has direct material information regarding the evidence submitted by the defense." The judge raised a skeptical brow but allowed it. The doors opened and into the courtroom walked Cynthia Reyes, a former cybersecurity consultant, and more importantly, a former employee of Lord William Beckford's private tech security team. Beckford's face, for the first time, paled. Under oath, Cynthia sat down, her voice steady despite the eyes watching her. "I was employed by Mr. Beckford for 3 years. During that time, I was asked, along with a select group of hired hackers, to scrub a specific video from the internet, a video of an incident involving Mr. Beckford and a woman named Amara Lewis." A hush fell. Every reporter's pen scratched furiously. "Additionally," Cynthia continued, "we were ordered to fabricate legal documents suggesting Ms. Lewis had a prior criminal record. The conviction records the defense submitted? They're fake. I have email correspondences, payment receipts, and server logs to prove it. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the shuffling of disbelief. Even the judge, usually the pillar of composure, looked visibly shaken. Valerie pounced, presenting the court with printed records, emails from Beckford's legal aides authorizing the creation of the fake file, and the payment trail that led straight to Beckford's personal accounts. The defense team scrambled, objecting in vain, but the damage was done. The judge silenced the room with a firm gavel strike. Beckford's composure cracked, his jaw tightened, his eyes darted, a cornered man finally seeing his fortress crumble. Cameras from the press captured every angle, and within minutes, live updates flooded across America. Breaking. Whistleblower exposes Beckford's evidence tampering in courtroom bombshell. Public opinion flipped in real time. The hashtags changed, from doubt and suspicion back to justice for Amara. Expose Beckford. The judge, stern and clear, adjourned court for the day, ordering an immediate investigation into Beckford's tampering and potential criminal charges. As the courtroom emptied, Valerie turned to Amara, her voice low but triumphant. "That was our victory, Amara. The truth showed up." Amara didn't know whether to cry, laugh, or collapse, but one thing she knew as she glanced at Beckford, hunched, furious, and smaller than he had ever looked. She was no longer just fighting to survive. She was winning. When the final gavel fell, the courtroom was silent for a beat. The kind of silence that feels like the world itself holding its breath. Then came the verdict. William Beckford, liable on all counts. Not only was he ordered to pay millions in damages to Amara for defamation, emotional distress, and loss of income, but the judge also referred the matter for criminal investigation. Evidence of Beckford's witness tampering, evidence fabrication, and cyber crimes would now land him where his billions couldn't shield him, under federal scrutiny. As the news broke, headlines spread like wildfire. Beckford falls, billionaire brought down by lies and pride. Amara Lewis wins. A stand for dignity triumphs in court. Amara stood on the courthouse steps, Valerie by her side, Lucienne just behind her. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but she stood still for a moment, letting the sunlight hit her face. She wasn't just the woman who got slapped anymore. She was the woman who stood back up and made the world watch her do it. When asked by a reporter what victory felt like, Amara smiled softly and said, "It feels like breathing after holding your breath too long. It feels like knowing my son will see his mother fight and win, not just for us, but for every family like ours." It didn't take long for offers to come pouring in. Speaking engagements, book deals, TV appearances. But Amara's heart was in the kitchen, where her hands could shape flavors where she first found her voice. Lucienne approached her with an offer that didn't need a second thought. "Come work with me, Amara. Not just as a chef, but as the head of an entire new chapter. We'll build a restaurant chain that celebrates the stories behind every plate, every culture, every struggle." She accepted. And with that, Amara Lewis became executive chef of the Marchand Collective, a growing family of restaurants built on inclusion, excellence, and resilience. But she didn't stop there. With the settlement money, Amara founded Jayden's Hope Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing medical assistance, education, and mentorship to Black children suffering from chronic illnesses, especially those living in poverty. The foundation also offered legal aid to families battling discrimination in healthcare and education. At the launch event, standing before a room of supporters, Amara's voice was steady. No child should struggle to breathe. Not because of their lungs, not because of the weight of prejudice. Jayden's hope is my promise that we'll keep fighting. For health, for dignity, for tomorrow. Her story, once just a headline, became a legacy. And as she watched Jayden run through their small backyard, laughter clear and bright, Amara knew she hadn't just reclaimed her name, she had carved a path forward, for him, for herself, for everyone still waiting to stand. At the grand opening of Jayden's Hope Foundation, the room buzzed with energy. Not the clinking of champagne glasses or polite small talk, but the quiet hum of purpose. The audience was a mix of donors, community leaders, healthcare advocates, and families, many of whom had lived the same struggles Amara once thought she bore alone. She stood at the podium, the foundation's banner unfurled behind her, Jayden watching proudly from the front row. The lights dimmed slightly, the cameras clicked in steady rhythm, and for a moment, Amara simply looked across the crowd, her heart full. "When I first stood up to William Beckford," she began, her voice steady but rich with emotion, "I didn't do it to make a statement. I did it because I was tired of feeling small, tired of pretending I wasn't hurt, tired of swallowing my dignity to survive." She paused, glancing at her son, drawing strength from his gentle smile. "I learned that the world is stubborn. It holds on to its prejudices like old furniture it refuses to throw away. We can't change that overnight. Maybe we can't change it at all. But here's what we can do." She straightened, her gaze fierce yet hopeful. "We can choose not to bow to it, not to let it define us, not to let it tell our children who they can or can't become." The crowd stirred, the weight of her words sinking in. Jayden's hope isn't just about healthcare or opportunity. It's about reminding every child, or every family, that their worth isn't up for debate. That's our fight. That's our promise. The applause that followed was long, heartfelt, and standing. Amara had spoken not just for herself, but for a generation still waiting to breathe freely. As the applause faded that evening, what lingered wasn't just the sound, it was the message. And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson from Amara's story. Dignity is not something we're given, it's something we claim, often at great cost, and something we must protect, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that follow. For many of us, especially those of us who've lived long enough to see the world change in waves, this story strikes a familiar chord. We've witnessed prejudice in our lifetimes, in boardrooms, on sidewalks, even within our own communities. And yet, if Amara's journey teaches us anything, it's that the battle for respect doesn't retire with age. It lives in every stand we take, in every time we refuse to let someone else define our worth. There's also a deeper reminder here. It's never too late to fight for what's right. Whether you're a young mother in Queens or a retiree in Kansas, your voice matters. Change begins when we decide that our silence is no longer affordable, when we realize that standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, can reshape futures. And let's not forget, we're never too old to inspire. Amara stood for her son, but in doing so, she inspired a nation. If you're watching this today, think of the moments in your life when you stayed silent, when you looked away, and ask yourself, what would have happened if I'd stood up instead? Let this be a call to all of us, to protect our dignity, to defend the vulnerable, and to believe that the fight for justice belongs to every generation. Because if we don't teach the next generation how to stand tall, who will? If this story moved you, if it stirred a memory, a lesson, or even a renewed sense of courage, I invite you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that challenges, inspires, and reminds us all of the power of standing up for what's right.